Most people remember the moment their life changed, but mine began with a storm and a clock that read 7:43 p.m. Rain hammered against the front windows of Russo's, the upscale Italian restaurant where I worked 3 nights a week, turning the Chicago streets outside into rivers of reflected light. My sneakers squeaked against the polished floor as I hurried between tables carrying trays, apologizing for delays and pretending everything was perfectly under control. Friday nights were always chaotic. Customers filled every seat. The kitchen moved at full speed. Glasses clinked. Conversations overlapped. The entire restaurant felt alive. Usually, I liked that feeling. Noise left less room for unwanted thoughts. That night was different. I pushed through the employee entrance 20 minutes late, soaked from head to toe despite the umbrella clutched in my hand. My hair dripped onto my shoulders. My jacket was wrinkled. My hands would not stop trembling no matter how many times I rubbed them together. "Emily, are you okay?" one of the servers asked as I rushed past. "I am fine," I answered automatically. The words came so quickly they barely sounded real anymore. People nodded when they heard them. They always did. Fine was a useful word. It ended conversations. It prevented questions. It built walls. I hung my jacket inside the staff room and stared at my reflection in the locker mirror. Pale face. Tired eyes. Forced smile. The image looked convincing enough. At least from a distance. I grabbed my apron and stepped back onto the restaurant floor. Nobody seemed to notice anything unusual. That should have comforted me. Instead, it made me feel strangely invisible. The next hour blurred together in a rush of orders and polite greetings. Then the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough for people to glance toward the entrance. I followed their eyes. Vincent Russo had arrived. Even if nobody knew exactly what he did, everyone knew who he was. Owner. Investor. Businessman. The man whose name sat above the restaurant doors. He rarely appeared without warning. Yet the moment he walked inside, conversations softened. Managers straightened their posture. Staff moved a little faster. Vincent never demanded attention. Somehow, attention followed him anyway. I looked away quickly and focused on arranging glasses near table 12. Men like Vincent Russo belonged to a world far above mine. A world of tailored suits, private offices, and decisions that shaped entire companies. My concerns were tuition payments and passing exams. We might as well have lived on different planets. A few minutes later, I carried a tray of sparkling water toward a crowded booth near the back of the restaurant. As I passed the bar area, someone accidentally bumped my shoulder. The tray tilted. Several glasses rattled dangerously. Before they could fall, another hand reached out and steadied the edge. Strong. Precise. Effortless. My heart jumped as I looked up. Vincent Russo stood directly beside me. "Careful," he said quietly. "Long night?" I swallowed and forced another smile. Something like that. His eyes studied me for a second longer than most people would have. Not my uniform. Not the tray. Me. It was not curiosity. It was observation. The kind that made me feel like he noticed details other people missed. Then someone called his name from across the room. The moment ended. Vincent stepped away and continued toward the private dining section. Yet as I watched him disappear into the crowd, I could not shake the strange feeling that he had seen something in my expression that I had worked very hard to hide. The rest of the evening should have been ordinary, but after that brief encounter, I found myself glancing toward the private dining section more often than I should have. Not because of Vincent Russo. At least that is what I told myself. The truth was that his expression lingered in my mind. Most people looked at me and saw a waitress carrying trays and taking orders. For a split second, I had the uncomfortable feeling that he saw something deeper. Something I was not ready for anyone to notice. I pushed the thought away and focused on work. Table 6 needed another bottle of sparkling water. Table 9 wanted dessert menus. The dining room remained packed despite the storm outside. Rain continued sliding down the windows in silver streaks while headlights reflected across the wet streets beyond. By 9 o'clock, the restaurant felt warmer than ever. Customers laughed. Wine glasses clinked. Soft piano music drifted through hidden speakers overhead. Everything appeared normal. Then the front door opened. A blast of cold air swept into the room. I happened to be near the hostess stand when it happened. A young woman stepped inside from the rain. She looked about my age. Maybe younger. Her sweater was soaked. Her hair clung to her shoulders. She seemed disoriented, as though she had been wandering through the storm for hours. The hostess immediately approached her. The woman attempted to smile, but her expression faltered. Several customers glanced toward the entrance. Something about her seemed wrong. Not dangerous. Just distressed. I took a step forward without thinking. "Are you okay?" I asked softly. She looked at me for a moment before nodding. "I think so." Her voice barely rose above a whisper. Before anyone could say anything else, her knees buckled. Gasps echoed through the lobby as she lost balance. The hostess reached for her. I dropped the menus in my hands and hurried forward. Together, we helped guide her into a nearby chair. The restaurant suddenly felt quieter. Concern spread through the room. A manager rushed over. Someone offered water. Another employee called for medical assistance. The young woman kept insisting she was fine. The words sounded familiar. Too familiar. I had said the same thing countless times. Fine. The most common lie in the world. A few moments later, I became aware of movement across the dining room. Vincent Russo had emerged from the private section. He crossed the restaurant with calm, deliberate steps. Unlike everyone else, he did not seem confused. He simply observed. His eyes moved from the woman to the concerned staff surrounding her. Then his gaze briefly landed on me. For reasons I could not explain, a chill traveled through me. Not fear. Instinct. The feeling that something important had just happened. The woman accepted a blanket from one of the employees and thanked everyone quietly. The immediate crisis seemed to pass. Conversation slowly resumed. Customers returned to their meals. Yet Vincent remained standing near the entrance, watching the situation unfold with an intensity that felt unusual. As I gathered the menus I had dropped earlier, I noticed him speaking quietly with the general manager. No raised voices. No dramatic gestures. Just a brief conversation. Then Vincent looked once more toward the young woman sitting near the lobby. His expression hardened almost imperceptibly. Whatever he had noticed, I knew one thing. He was not going to ignore it. For the next hour, I tried to focus on work, but my attention kept drifting toward the young woman near the lobby. An ambulance had been offered, but she politely declined after speaking with the medical team that arrived. She insisted she was feeling better. She thanked everyone for their kindness. She smiled whenever someone checked on her. Yet every smile seemed fragile, like something carefully held together. I recognized that look because I had worn it myself. Around 10 o'clock, the restaurant finally began to slow down. Several tables emptied. The noise softened. The storm outside continued, but the dining room felt calmer. I carried a tray of empty glasses toward the kitchen when I noticed the young woman standing near the entrance preparing to leave. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and glanced nervously through the front windows. The reaction lasted only a second, but it was enough to catch my attention. She looked as though she was deciding whether she truly wanted to step outside. Before I could think much about it, Vincent Russo appeared beside her. I could not hear the beginning of their conversation, but I saw him speaking quietly. His posture remained relaxed, respectful. He did not crowd her. He did not pressure her. He simply listened. The young woman answered something. Vincent nodded. Then he said a few words that caused her expression to soften slightly. Whatever he had said seemed to reassure her. A few moments later, one of the restaurant managers joined them. Then another employee. Arrangements were being made for something, although I could not tell what. Curiosity pulled at me, but customers still needed attention. By the time I returned from the kitchen, the young woman was gone. So was Vincent. The rest of my shift passed without incident. Midnight approached. Chairs were stacked. Receipts were counted. Staff members began discussing weekend plans. Normally, I enjoyed listening to those conversations. Tonight, I felt distracted. As I cleaned a table near the bar, Maria walked over carrying a bucket of silverware. "Did you see all that?" she asked. "See what?" The girl from earlier. I nodded. What about her? Maria lowered her voice. Apparently, Mr. Russo spent nearly 30 minutes reviewing security footage after she left. I stopped wiping the table. Security footage? That is what I heard. She shrugged. Nobody knows why. My stomach tightened unexpectedly. Vincent Russo did not strike me as a man who wasted time. If he was reviewing cameras personally, he must have noticed something important. Something the rest of us had missed. Later, after the restaurant closed, I stepped outside into the cool night air. The rain had finally stopped. Water still glistened across the sidewalks beneath the streetlights. As I headed toward my car, I glanced back through the restaurant windows. Most of the lights were off. Only one office remained illuminated on the second floor. Through the glass, I could see a solitary figure standing beside a desk. Vincent. Even from a distance, he appeared completely focused on whatever was displayed on the monitor in front of him. For reasons I could not explain, a strange certainty settled over me. The story of the young woman had not ended when she walked out the front door. In many ways, it felt like it was only beginning. The next afternoon, the storm clouds finally broke apart, leaving Chicago beneath a pale blue sky that felt almost unfamiliar after days of rain. I arrived early for my shift, hoping work would distract me from the questions that had followed me home the night before. It did not. The image of Vincent standing alone in that office remained fixed in my mind. More specifically, the look of concentration on his face. Whatever he had seen in those security recordings had kept him there long after everyone else left. The restaurant was quiet when I arrived. Lunch service had ended. Dinner preparations were underway. Cooks moved through the kitchen. Managers reviewed schedules. Everything felt normal on the surface. Yet an unusual tension lingered beneath the routine. I noticed it almost immediately. Staff members exchanged glances. Conversations stopped when supervisors approached. Something was happening. Nobody seemed willing to discuss it openly. Around 4 o'clock, I was polishing wine glasses behind the bar when the general manager received a phone call. His expression changed as he listened. Not alarm. Focus. He thanked the caller and headed directly toward the administrative offices. 10 minutes later, another manager followed. Then another. Curiosity spread through the staff. Nobody knew what was going on. Everyone felt it. Maria eventually appeared beside me carrying a stack of menus. You feel it too, right? She asked quietly. Feel what? Whatever this is. She gestured vaguely toward the offices. I glanced in the same direction. Maybe it is a business meeting. Maria laughed. Nobody looks that serious during a business meeting. Before I could answer, the front doors opened. Vincent Russo entered. The effect was immediate. Several conversations stopped. Employees straightened. Managers emerged from different parts of the building almost as if they had been waiting for him. Vincent acknowledged them with a brief nod before disappearing into the conference room near the back of the restaurant. The door closed behind him. For the next 2 hours, nobody entered or left. The mystery only grew. Dinner service eventually began, forcing me to focus on customers. The restaurant filled steadily. Orders arrived. Drinks were delivered. Yet every time I passed the hallway leading toward the conference room, I found myself glancing at the closed door. Shortly after 7 o'clock, it finally opened. Vincent stepped out first. Several managers followed. Their expressions were different now. Determined. Purposeful. Whatever questions existed yesterday appeared to have become answers today. As Vincent crossed the dining room, his gaze briefly met mine. The moment lasted less than a second. Yet something about his expression stood out. He looked satisfied. Not happy. Not relieved. Certain. Like a man who had finally found the piece of a puzzle he had been searching for. Later that evening, while clearing a table near the entrance, I overheard 2 supervisors speaking quietly. The footage connected everything, one of them said. I cannot believe nobody noticed sooner. My attention sharpened immediately. Before I could hear anything else, they lowered their voices and walked away. I stood frozen beside the table for several seconds. Footage. Connections. Answers. The young woman from the storm had vanished from the restaurant less than 24 hours earlier. Yet somehow her story was continuing behind closed doors. And Vincent Russo seemed determined to follow it wherever it led. The mystery followed me home that night. Not because I knew the young woman. I did not. Not because anyone had shared details. They had not. What bothered me was the growing sense that something important had happened right in front of dozens of people, and almost nobody had noticed it. The following morning, I sat through 3 hours of classes at the university and retained almost nothing. My notebook filled with half-finished sentences while my mind wandered back to the restaurant. Back to the rain. Back to the frightened look in the young woman's eyes when she stared through the front windows. By late afternoon, I was back at Russo's preparing for another shift. The moment I walked through the employee entrance, I knew something had changed. The atmosphere felt lighter. Not relaxed exactly, but purposeful. Like a group of people working toward a common goal. Employees moved with unusual confidence. Managers spoke quietly but seemed less tense than before. Whatever answers had been uncovered during the previous day, they were beginning to produce results. Around 6 o'clock, I was organizing menus near the hostess stand when I noticed Vincent speaking with the head of security. Several folders rested on the counter between them. Vincent listened carefully while the security chief pointed to different pages. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes. Then Vincent closed one of the folders and nodded. The security chief actually smiled. It was the first smile I had seen from him all week. Curiosity burned stronger than ever. An hour later, Maria found me refilling water glasses. "You know what I heard," she whispered. "What?" "They found witnesses." I nearly dropped the pitcher. "Witnesses to what?" She shrugged. "Nobody is saying." That answer only deepened the mystery. Witnesses meant questions. Questions meant events. Events meant the young woman's arrival had not been random. Somewhere in the middle of dinner service, I caught sight of Vincent again. This time he was standing alone near the front windows, looking out toward the street. His expression remained calm, but there was something different about him now. Determination. Whatever investigation he had started was no longer about collecting information. It was about confirming it. Later that night, after the busiest rush ended, I stepped outside through the side employee entrance to get a few minutes of fresh air. The city glowed beneath clear skies for the first time in days. Traffic moved steadily through downtown Chicago. As I stood there, the side door opened behind me. I turned and nearly froze. Vincent Russo stepped outside. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he glanced toward the street and said quietly, "Sometimes people tell you everything without saying a single word." I looked at him surprised. "What does that mean?" A faint smile appeared. "It means most people only listen to what they are told. Very few pay attention to what they see." Before I could ask another question, his phone vibrated. He checked the screen. The smile disappeared. Not because of concern. Because of certainty. Whatever message had arrived, it confirmed something he had been expecting. Vincent slipped the phone back into his pocket and headed toward the entrance. As he opened the door, he paused briefly and looked back at me. "The truth has a way of finding daylight, Emily." Then he disappeared inside, leaving me standing beneath the city lights with the strange feeling that the final pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The next week passed in a strange balance between routine and anticipation. Life continued exactly as it always had on the surface. I attended classes. I studied for exams. I worked evening shifts at Russo's. Yet beneath that familiar rhythm, something invisible was moving. I could feel it every time I walked through the restaurant. The uncertainty that had surrounded the mysterious young woman was slowly disappearing. In its place came a growing sense that answers were close. One Tuesday evening, nearly a week after the storm, I arrived for work and immediately noticed a small change. The security team seemed more relaxed. Managers no longer whispered behind closed doors. Even Maria appeared less curious than before. Whatever investigation Vincent had been pursuing seemed to be reaching its conclusion. Around 7 o'clock, while delivering drinks to a table near the windows, I spotted Vincent sitting alone in one of the private booths. No meeting. No associates. Just a cup of coffee and several documents spread across the table. He looked thoughtful rather than busy. For the first time since all of this began, he seemed at peace. The sight surprised me. Every previous glimpse of him had been accompanied by tension and focus. Tonight felt different. Later, during a quieter moment, I found myself organizing menus near the booth where he sat. I had no intention of interrupting him. Yet before I could walk away, Vincent looked up from the papers. "How are your classes going?" The question caught me off guard. "Good," I answered. "Busy, but good." He nodded. "That usually means you are making progress." A small smile escaped me. "That sounds like something a professor would say. I am glad I do not have to grade your exams then." The unexpected humor made me laugh. For a brief moment, he looked less like the powerful owner everyone respected and more like an ordinary person enjoying a conversation. Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen. The same look I had seen before returned. Not concern. Resolution. Vincent stood, gathered the documents, and slipped the phone into his pocket. "Looks like the final piece just arrived," he said quietly. Before I could ask what he meant, he walked toward the office hallway. The words stayed with me all evening. The final piece. By closing time, the restaurant was nearly empty. I finished cleaning my section and headed toward the employee exit. As I stepped outside, I noticed a familiar figure standing across the parking lot beneath a streetlight. For a second, I did not recognize her. Then realization struck. It was the young woman from the storm. She looked completely different. Rested. Calm. Confident. She was speaking with one of the restaurant managers and smiling genuinely this time. Not the fragile smile I remembered from that rainy night. A real one. Something inside me relaxed. Whatever had happened behind the scenes, whatever truth Vincent had been searching for, it had clearly helped bring peace back into her life. As I watched her walk away beneath the city lights, I finally understood what Vincent had been fighting for all along. It was never about proving he was right. It was about making sure someone who felt invisible knew that their story mattered. 3 days later, the truth finally surfaced, although not in the dramatic way people usually imagine. There were no public confrontations. No shouting. No scenes worthy of a movie. Instead, it arrived quietly, piece by piece, exactly the way Vincent had predicted. I learned most of it by accident. The restaurant was unusually calm that Thursday evening. A corporate event had been canceled, leaving several sections empty. I was organizing reservation cards near the hostess stand when the general manager approached me. "Do you remember the young woman from the storm?" he asked. I nodded immediately. "Of course." He smiled. "She wanted everyone here to know she is doing well." Something warm settled in my chest. "That is good to hear." He hesitated for a moment. Apparently, a lot of misunderstandings were finally cleared up. That was all he said before returning to work, but the words stayed with me. Misunderstandings. Cleared up. For the first time, I realized the story had never been about a single difficult night. It had been about someone who needed people to pay attention long enough to understand what was really happening. Later that evening, I found Vincent sitting in the same private booth where I had seen him a week earlier. The documents were gone. The constant phone calls had stopped. The tension that had surrounded him for days seemed to have disappeared. He looked tired, but satisfied. As I delivered a cup of coffee to his table, he thanked me and returned to reading something on his tablet. Then, unexpectedly, he looked up. "You have been curious about all of this, have you not?" I nearly laughed. Was it that obvious? Very. I glanced around to make sure nobody was waiting for service. "Did you find what you were looking for?" Vincent studied me for a second before answering. "I found the truth." "And?" A faint smile crossed his face. "The truth helped the right people." Simple words. Yet they somehow carried more weight than a detailed explanation ever could. I nodded slowly. "Then I guess it was worth all the effort." His expression softened. It always is. The conversation ended there, but something important shifted inside me. For days I had viewed the entire situation as a mystery waiting to be solved. Vincent had viewed it differently. To him, it was never about solving a mystery. It was about making sure someone was not abandoned when they needed help. As the evening continued, I found myself seeing him in a different light. Not as the intimidating owner whose name sat above the restaurant doors. Not as the powerful businessman everyone respected, but as a man who refused to ignore problems simply because they belonged to someone else. Near closing time, I glanced through the front windows and noticed the city glowing beneath a sky full of stars. The storms were gone. The streets looked peaceful. For the first time since that rainy night, the entire restaurant felt peaceful too. And somewhere beyond those lights, a young woman who once walked through our doors carrying invisible burdens was finally beginning a new chapter of her life. 2 weeks passed before I saw her again. By then, the mystery that had consumed the restaurant had faded into memory for most people. Customers came and went. New reservations filled the books. Life moved forward the way it always did. Yet every now and then, I found myself wondering how the young woman was doing. Whether she had found stability. Whether she had found peace. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, I got my answer. The lunch crowd had thinned, leaving the dining room bathed in warm sunlight streaming through the tall front windows. I was arranging silverware when the entrance door opened. At first, I barely looked up. Then I recognized her. She stepped inside with a confidence that had not existed the night we first met. Her shoulders were no longer tense. Her smile looked genuine. Even the way she walked seemed different. Lighter. Freer. The hostess greeted her warmly. Several employees immediately recognized her as well. Conversations paused. Smiles appeared. It felt less like a customer arriving and more like an old friend returning. I watched from across the room as she thanked everyone for their kindness during that difficult evening weeks earlier. There was gratitude in her voice, but also strength. Whatever chapter she had left behind, it no longer seemed to control her. A few minutes later, Vincent entered from the private office hallway. The moment he saw her, he stopped. Not dramatically. Just long enough for me to notice. The young woman smiled and walked toward him. They spoke quietly near the entrance. I could not hear the conversation, but I did not need to. The respect between them was obvious. Vincent listened while she spoke. Then he nodded. She reached into her purse and handed him a folded envelope. He accepted it, glanced at the front, and smiled faintly. It was one of the rarest things I had ever seen. Gratitude reflected back at gratitude. After a few more words, she left the restaurant. This time, when the door closed behind her, nobody felt worried. Nobody looked concerned. The atmosphere remained calm because everyone understood she was leaving for something better. Later that afternoon, I happened to pass Vincent's booth while delivering coffee to another table. The envelope rested beside him. Its contents partially visible. A handwritten thank you note. Nothing more. Nothing less. Somehow, that simple gesture seemed more valuable than anything else on the table. Vincent noticed me glancing toward it. Good news? I asked. He looked down at the letter for a moment. The best kind. Which is? For a second, he appeared to consider the question. Then he folded the note carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. When someone gets their life back. The answer stayed with me long after my shift ended. That evening, as I walked through downtown Chicago beneath a sky painted orange by the setting sun, I finally understood why the entire story had affected me so deeply. It was never about power. It was never about influence. It was about attention. One person noticed what everyone else overlooked. One person refused to look away. And, because of that decision, a stranger was able to find hope again. 6 months later, the city looked completely different. Summer sunlight filled the streets of Chicago where storm clouds had once dominated the skyline. Trees lined the sidewalks in deep shades of green. Outdoor cafes were crowded with people laughing over coffee and late lunches. Life moved forward, just as it always does. I was only a few weeks away from completing my final semester at the university. My grades had never been better. The future that once felt uncertain now felt real. Some evenings, after classes ended, I still worked a few shifts at Russo's. Not because I had to, because it had become part of my story. The restaurant no longer reminded me of mysteries or unanswered questions. It reminded me of the night everything changed. One Saturday afternoon, the dining room buzzed with activity as sunlight streamed through the windows. I was helping prepare for a private event when the front door opened. A familiar face stepped inside. The young woman from the storm. For a moment, I almost did not recognize her. Confidence radiated from her now. Her smile came easily. Her eyes carried none of the fear I remembered. She was accompanied by family members who greeted the staff warmly. Several employees immediately recognized her and welcomed her back. The atmosphere felt joyful, like watching someone return home after a long journey. A few minutes later, Vincent emerged from his office. When she saw him, her face lit up. She crossed the room and hugged him briefly before stepping back. The gesture was simple, respectful, and filled with gratitude. I watched from across the restaurant as they talked. This time there were no questions, no investigations, no hidden concerns, only appreciation. Eventually, the young woman handed Vincent a framed photograph. He accepted it with obvious surprise. After she returned to her family, I happened to pass by his table. The photograph showed her smiling beside several loved ones during what appeared to be a recent celebration. A new beginning captured in a single moment. Vincent studied the picture quietly before setting it beside him. "She looks happy," I said. He glanced toward the dining room where she sat laughing with her family. "She is." There was satisfaction in his voice. Not pride. Something deeper. Relief. The kind that comes from knowing a difficult chapter has finally ended well. As the afternoon continued, guests filled the restaurant with conversation and laughter. The sunlight grew warmer. The city outside seemed brighter than ever. Near the end of my shift, I stood by the front windows watching people move along the busy sidewalk. Vincent joined me a few moments later. Neither of us spoke immediately. We simply watched the city. Finally, I smiled. "You were right." He raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "The truth finding daylight." A faint smile appeared. "It usually does." I looked back toward the dining room where the young woman sat surrounded by people who cared about her. Then I thought about the rainy night when she first walked through those doors, feeling alone and unseen. So much had changed since then. Not because someone rescued her. Because someone noticed her. Someone cared enough to ask questions when everyone else moved on. Sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is refuse to look away. And sometimes a single act of attention can change the course of an entire life. As the afternoon sunlight filled the restaurant, I realized that was the real story all along.